All right, so we have talked about variables, we've talked about objects, we talked about arrays. The next thing we need to talk about is variable scope. Now this is again another important concept to understand. So right now we have really two lines here, and I'm just going to delete everything here, and if you want to take a couple seconds to delete all that text, you can. So let's take a look at this scope here. Now I'm just going to remove the output because not really any of this matters. So when I declare a variable at the top of the page here, I can use that variable throughout the entire page. So if I add in a function here called, something like print score, and these are again just examples here, I can use variable number here. I can set it to 23 or stuff like that here. I can use variable numbers. It doesn't matter if I have 1 functions or 10 functions or 33 functions. It doesn't matter. I can use variable number in each one of those functions. However, if I declare a variable within these curly brackets, I can only use that variable within the curly brackets here. So if I add in, for example, var, we'll call this scope variable, make that equal to 20, or we'll make it equal to 11. I can then go and use scope variable right here. Okay, you can see that it looks here. And you'll notice that in JSBin it turns the color. Okay, look at that. Now watch what happens if I add in scope variable here. Now, okay, we'll make it equal to 33. It doesn't really matter. All right. What happens here is that you'll notice that the color is not the same. And technically this is an error. Okay? The reason is that this variable here is outside of the scope here. So this variable is not seen, doesn't exist, because the scope of this scope variable is only within the curly brackets. So if you declare a variable within the curly brackets, you can only use it within the curly brackets. Now what's not technically seen here and in most JavaScript is that there is technically a curly bracket, but it's kind of invisible. Okay? In other programming languages it's like that, but there's kind of a invisible curly bracket up at the top there, where this whole script is a part of one major item. And that's why you can go and use a variable up at the top or declare a variable at the top and then use it throughout the entire page. Okay? So all of this here is very important because oftentimes you will need to declare variables within curly brackets. There are other times when we do this. For example, there's if statements and for loops, etc., where you need to declare variables within curly brackets, but you can't use the variable outside of curly brackets here. Now, if I add in scope variable right here, you're thinking, wait just a minute. You can't add in two variables, the same name. That's right. I couldn't add in another variable number here because that would be an error. However, I can declare as many scope variables as I want as long as they're in different curly brackets. So if I have 100 functions, I could have 100 scope variables within the curly brackets and it's okay. You generally tend to see this quite a bit in programming actually. You tend to see it a lot because what happens is that you end up using kind of the same variable within different functions. All right, so that's what variable scope is. It's super important. The one last item I want to deal with here is some programmers don't like to use these global variables which you can kind of see the entire or use throughout the entire project. They find it a bit sloppy. Now in JavaScript, it's not as big of an issue. However, in other places, it is a much bigger issue. So for now, when I'm coding in JavaScript, most of the variables that I like to use are these global variables, and very rarely do I use these scope variables. However, once you get into more complicated applications, you're going to be seeing more and more of these scope variables.